Sally, thank you so much for joining me on the Teachers Podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about vocabulary, which I know you're really passionate about, and it's something that I'm really interested in. And when we had the conversation on the phone last week, I was in awe of just the knowledge that you had. So I'm really looking forward to this interview because even just talking to you just now, there's so many things that you're going to be able to share. So thank you.
Thank you. I think vocabulary is really central to a lot of people's agendas at the minute, wanting to think about how we can develop children's vocabularies and help them to use that vocabulary to improve their reading and writing, speaking and listening. So hopefully today listeners will get some great ideas on things to take away in the classroom.
Not hopefully, they definitely will.
Definitely.
Okay, so one of the things that I always ask everyone to do is give a bit of a backstory. And so just to mention to everyone listening and watching, I did prep you before saying, don't be short on this. People are very interested because you've got a strange accent going on and we want to know all about it. So tell me everything.
Okay. I always say to people, if you've seen that episode on Friends with Monica and Rachel, where they have a friend who goes from America to live in the UK, and she comes back and she says, "Oh, call me on my mobile." That's a little bit like my accent now. So I'm originally from America, but I've lived here for 15 years. My husband was born and raised in Nottinghamshire. I have 2 children with very broad Yorkshire accents, and I'm somewhere in between. And if I talk to you long enough, I'll probably start sounding like you, Claire. So look out,
The best accent I have. The best one for radio and podcasting, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So obviously I grew up in America. I grew up in Florida, in South Florida, very hot and sunny.
So you must be freezing here.
I was for about 10 years, and I've thawed out now. But yeah, really hot and sunny, which seems really nice, but when you live there, it's not so much. It's very flat. It's just sunshine all the time. You wake up on Christmas Day and it's like 25 degrees. Who wants that? You'll probably be thinking, well, I do, but no, it gets a bit...
No, not on Christmas Day, but a lot of the other time would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So grew up in Florida, went through the schooling system there, went to an amazingly large high school, which has since been condemned, I think. It was a very, very old building, but there were upwards of about 3,000 students who went to this school. Decided to go to university at the University of Central Florida, which is in Orlando, about half an hour from Disney World, which was amazing. Especially when you have friends who worked in... They were dancers and singers, and they could always get you in to Disney World. From time to time, they would get passes, so that was great. So I went to UCF, which is what we call University of Central Florida, and really, really enjoyed my time there. But the American system is really different to the UK system. So am I right in saying that you have to decide quite early on, even when you're in secondary school, kind of your trajectory of where you want to go with your career?
Well, you don't have to decide. I guess if you wanted to do a certain thing like dentistry, then you might need certain A-levels in secondary school, I guess. I think for me, I just went with what I was interested in, but you do have to choose the actual degree you're going to do, the subjects.
See, in America, it's really different. So the university courses are 4-year courses, and your first 2 years, which you call your freshman year, or your freshman and sophomore are your first 2 years. And in those first 2 years, you do what's called general education, and I assume it would be equivalent to A-levels here. It's where you start to test out what you might be interested in. And I did a lot of the ologies then. I did a bit of anthropology, I did a bit of sociology, I did a bit of psychology.
So can you choose then?
You can pick and choose. So there are certain subjects that you have to take. So there are English requirements and requirements for mathematics.
Right.
But beyond that, it's an opportunity when you get to university to kind of explore what you might want to do. It's only then at the end of your second year that you have to declare a major. So that's what they say, you're undeclared. It seems like quite dramatic, your first 2 years. I'm undeclared. But you have to decide by the end of your second year, because your final 2 years, your junior and senior year, are content specific in what you're majoring in. And it was really only at that time on the wire that I decided I wanted to go into teaching.
Right.
I had taken some courses on child psychology, and I thought, well, that's quite interesting. I had dabbled into some teaching when I was younger at the local dance studio, and that was quite a fun experience. So I thought, yeah, we'll give teaching a go. As soon as I got into it, I was absolutely hooked. So did the 2-year course in Florida. But then I made a really interesting decision, and for any teachers listening, if you've qualified to teach somewhere and then you move, it's really difficult, isn't it? So you've qualified to teach, you have your connections through your placements, and then you uproot and go somewhere else, and that's exactly what I did. So
I think though, actually, and obviously we're in England, a lot of teachers from England don't have to get the qualifications elsewhere. And that seems quite unfair, doesn't it? So it is well known that actually from other countries, when people come here, they do have to get the qualifications, but often teachers who have learned to teach here don't.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. It's all about the reciprocity. So how we have reciprocity with different countries, and whether I could go from the UK to teach in America. And the answer is, yeah, sure, come on over. We'd love to have you. Or if you want to come from the US to the UK to teach, you have to jump through many, many hoops. So there's a lot more in terms of specific requirements coming from out of country. So I trained to teach, and then I moved to North Carolina because I wanted to get some Christmas weather.
Right, okay.
I wanted to see some seasons.
Yeah.
And I moved there, and when I got there, I did something really bizarre. I just drove around to all the local primary schools with my resume, with my CV, and I just went into the office and said, "Are you looking for any teachers?" This was literally 2 weeks before school started. And I happened to land in a brilliant school called Bailiwick Elementary in Raleigh. And the head teacher there was a lady called Terry Allen. And I just clicked with her automatically. I dropped my resume off, had a bit of a chat with her, and she says, "I'll tell you what, can you come back in 2 hours for an interview?"
Wow.
And I did. And it turned out that someone that they had appointed had decided to go for another job, so they were panicking a bit, and it just all the stars aligned. I worked at Bailiwick Elementary for several years. It was a 3rd grade class, which is the equivalent to year 2 at the time. Really enjoyed that. Very quickly ended up becoming what we call grade level chairperson. So we had it's a 5 entry school, so we had 5 teachers teaching 3rd grade, and I was kind of it's a huge school.
Is that normal then for schools of that age to have that many classes?
In that area of Raleigh, it's more common to have fewer schools but larger schools.
Right, okay.
Than you wouldn't have. I mean, I live in rural North Yorkshire, and I think at last count there were 340 something primary schools. Some of which only have 20 pupils. You wouldn't really see that in Raleigh's quite a metropolitan, it's big city area in the country. So ended up kind of having those leadership opportunities, moving up and doing different opportunities with leadership within the school. But then my husband, the soon-to-be husband, arrived.
Okay.
He was teaching over here at the time. So he was a teacher in North Yorkshire. He was teaching over in Scarborough. And it was a time when the government were offering grants for teachers. If they'd been in teaching for 3 years, or 3 or 4 years, they were given a grant of a couple of £1,000s to develop themselves, to encourage people to stay into teaching, which I think is actually quite a good idea. So my husband thought, hey, I'm going to America.
What year was this?
Oh, this was in 2003, 4.
Yeah, because I qualified, I think, 2005, and I remember there being something like that, and I did consider it, but I think you had to go for too long, and I thought, oh no.
Yeah, so he did that, and he made a connection with the teacher in his school, with the teacher in my school, and we always joke it was love at first sight in the copy room, and that was that. So I stopped my job there, which was actually a really sad time because I loved working at Bailiwick. I loved the team and the children. It was a great school to work with. You felt really supported, and I moved over to the UK. Now, going back to what we were talking about with reciprocity, I had a massive shock.
Yeah.
So I moved over here. I had been teaching, I think it was 6 years at the time. I was halfway through my first master's degree, which was a specialism in literacy, reading. And I came here and they told me, oh, you have to requalify.
Yeah.
So I had to start.
You're so experienced at that point.
So I was frustrated, but I thought, well, you know, he's worth it. So so I did it. And I requalified through something called the Graduate Teacher Program, which people might be familiar with.
Yeah.
And it was something specific called the OTTP, which is the Overseas Trained Teacher Program.
Yeah.
So essentially, it was a funny program because you had to get a job in a school, and once you had a job, then you could apply to be on the course. So the school really had to take a risk on you. And again, luckily, the head that I had at the time, she took a risk on me, not, you know, as an unqualified teacher. Also, I was quite cheap.
Yeah, well, this is what I was going to ask you, actually.
I was quite cheap for the first year, and I ended up teaching, and that was a mixed year 4, 5 and 6 class. So back to what we were saying, from a massive 5-form entry school, this school only had about 60 children in the entire school. So it was a massive culture shock, educational culture shock, personal culture shock, everything. But it was a really good time. So I worked in that school for several years, and then it was about that time that the primary framework was coming in, and North Yorkshire Advisory Service were looking for teachers to join them to kind of deliver primary framework training to support that development. So I was seconded to support the North Yorkshire English team, and that eventually led to a position coming open. I applied, and then I was working for North Yorkshire as a national strategies consultant, which was really interesting. I was listening to your podcast with Jane Constantine.
Yeah, I was just thinking of hers. You said that,
and it was a really interesting time because you would.
Did you know her?
I didn't know. Well, I might have done, but I think she was in a slightly different area because we were in regional groups. So we got to know people within your region. We had meetings every month, and you went and they said, right, here's the package. This is what you need to deliver. Luckily, we had a great English team in North Yorkshire. We all worked together really collaboratively, and we were able to kind of create something that still kind of fit the bill, but that also fit with what we thought was the right thing to do. And then my children arrived.
As they do.
Yes, just arrived. They just arrived.
Take over everything.
Yeah, one after another in very quick succession. And at the time, as you know, local authorities, there was a lot happening in terms of redundancy, and there's still a lot happening in terms of the reshuffling of funds. And so I took the decision to go. And I said, you know, I think there's a lot of people here who really want to continue to do this, and I thought my heart's just not really in it anymore, and I'd rather go and have time with my boys. So I did that. And then after doing that, people started contacting me saying, Kelly, I know you're not working anymore, but could you just come and deliver some phonics? Kelly, could you just come and talk to us about writing? Kelly, could you come? So people, that kind of encouraged me, and then that was when I set up my business, which is what I do now, which is independent consultancy with a specialism in primary English.
Wow, thank you.
And that's the journey.
Yeah, so I've got so many questions from that, which I'm just going to ask you now. So you said that you came over here and then you had a 4, 5, 6 class. How on earth did you find the curriculum that first year? Because you've been teaching, obviously, your 2-age children, and then you're in a completely different country, curriculum, age groups.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting because at the heart of it, whether you have a single age class or a mixed age class, you need to be catering for the needs of all of your learners. I think the biggest challenge for me was getting to grips with the change in the curriculum and the curriculum expectations. So whilst I was in America, I was very familiar with what children needed to know and when they needed to know it. So that was the challenge more, getting to grips with kind of the expectations and what they should be achieving when. But the basic principles of understanding what are children doing and what do they need to do next it was still applicable even though I had a mixed age class, and it was thinking about, how can we ensure that offer really challenges children in the most appropriate way.
So obviously you taught year 2 age children when you were in America. From what you know of the year 2 curriculum now, how do they compare about what they need to know?
Yeah, I think the approaches to teaching, we're going back quite a while now from when I was teaching in America, but the approaches to teaching back then, especially in terms of the teaching of literacy, were a lot more holistic. So you saw lots of things like reader's workshop and writer's workshop, which really interestingly are starting to come back into the fore now. So we would have these workshop style sessions, which is very similar to what we do now. Teacher would model a piece of text, and then children would have an opportunity to craft a text of their own. But the difference is that those writers' workshop sessions were very much focused on children writing about personal interests. So we didn't have that specific text-focused approach that we tend to have now within the curriculum, where we're reading a text, we're exploring the text as a reader, thinking again of the text as a writer, and how we can use language or grammatical structures or the tone or the message of the author to put across a particular message. So it was very different in that sense, but also it's quite interesting because you can see now things coming in to the UK curriculum, things like Writers' Workshop, which are often talked about with quite a lot of fervour on places like Twitter. Those were things that were happening back then in the US.
Yeah, also we're just copying basically.
No. It's at the end of the day, education.
It comes around.
It just goes. It swings in roundabouts, and there are some core principles, and we find this great way in education of like renaming the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and pretending it's something new so that new teachers can't find it.
But it's really good because it shows you that actually, as a teacher, there are some really core principles that work really well. The Writers' Workshop I was talking about was from Irene Fountas and Gay Supinel, who wrote the original guided reading text, Word Matters. So this is kind of in the mid-90s, really, really influential in my teacher training, kind of learning and understanding how reading and writing work and how we interact with text. But a lot of the new pieces of research, obviously they still reference previous, but as we grow and develop, it's about synthesizing that information into something slightly more useful based on the current climate.
Yeah, something more modern. How did you cope with the spelling changes? It just occurred to me then. So you're teaching writing and vocabulary, and I don't know whether you come at it from the same point of view as people in the UK, but our way is the right way. Yes. So how did you cope with that?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I find myself, I had to almost relearn how to spell certain things, like at the end of word. Well, first of all, we don't say Z, we say Z.
Yeah.
So the letter Z, not the letter Z. So if we have the word summarize, that would be with an I-Z-E in American, but it's I-S-E. Yeah. Or color with a U in there. And I think it was just kind of raising an awareness of what some of the major changes are. Yeah. I still get it wrong. There are still times in training sessions, but I just put it down and I say, oh, well, it's fine. It's just the American way. And it's quite a nice get out clause. Actually, no, that's the way we spell it there. And most people don't check to see if that's right or not. So that's fine.
I'm just thinking, the pressure you must feel.
Yeah, especially being a literacy consultant, kind of working in schools, talking to teachers about that. You want to make sure you get your spelling spot on, definitely.
But on the flip side, I also think, so obviously you do have that to contend with, but I think it's great that you're a literacy consultant because you bring something different. You bring in experience from somewhere else. You've got a wealth of experience instead of, working in one school for a number of years. You've got an array, and I think that is attractive. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting because even though it's been quite a while since I've I've taught in the US. I do travel back quite regularly. I was just there back in November, talking to some schools about some of the principles in the new book that I've written, which we'll talk about later. But it was really quite interesting thinking about still seeing practice in the schools and how they're developing things and how they are really, really quite similar to a lot of the things that we're developing here. You know, the heightened focus on this kind of text at the center of the curriculum, developing knowledge in subjects, knowledge to deepen understanding, reading and writing as a vehicle or a mode for communication to deepen knowledge and understanding. So you could theoretically walk into a classroom in the US and still feel quite at home, even though the curriculum is still quite different to how we've shaped the curriculum in the UK.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. So I'm really enjoying this whole, let's compare them. So in another sense of comparison then, how does the pay compare? Because I'm sure there are teachers listening now thinking, hang on a minute, I could go work in America and not have to, you know, do a qualification like you had to. Yeah. How does the pay compare?
Well, there is a bit of a caveat.
Okay.
So in the UK, as teachers, we get paid for 12 months of the year.
Oh, I think I've heard this, but go on.
So you get paid for 12 months of the year, understanding that there's only school time for 39 weeks of those 52 weeks, and the rest of the time you have as holiday pay.
Yeah. Well, you are actually paid for the 39 weeks, but spread over.
Right. Okay. Well, that's in terms of the US, you're only paid for 10 months. So the summer holidays is actually roughly 2 months, and you're not paid across that time. So whilst the pay looks really quite attractive, there is that to take into consideration, that that's pay for 10 months of the year, and then it's quite deceiving, because then you have to spread that out.
You have to make sure that you save some or work somewhere else.
But also it's the cost of living. So the cost of living, obviously it varies. If you're going to work in New York, you can forget it, because you're going to really struggle with the cost of living. But if you live somewhere in rural North Carolina, like I did, the cost of living is a lot more manageable. Places like Florida are a lot more expensive for obvious reasons, because of the tourist industry. So you do get a really different experience based on the state that you're going to. At the time when I was teaching over there, they had this new curriculum called the Common Core curriculum, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I have read a bit about it.
And before that time, each state had their own curriculum.
That's similar to Australia, I think.
Right.
They do seem to have different areas have their own curriculum.
So each state would have their own curriculum. You would decide what you were teaching, when you were teaching it, how the knowledge and skills progressed over time. But if you had a child who came in to your school from another state, there were massive gaps in knowledge, because the curriculum that they had, although there would be some common areas, there were also huge gaps, especially in foundation subjects like science. We call it social studies, history and geography combined, basically. So that was actually quite interesting as well. So it's contending with not only what I want to go and teach there. It might look really attractive, but you would want to think about what's the cost of living. Yeah. And actually, perhaps now with getting to the grips with the curriculum, that might be a little bit easier if they have the Common Core. Although if you asked American teachers, they'd probably say no, because not a lot of people are keen on the Common Core.
I have read that as well. I remember when he first came out on social media, and I was following that a lot. I was like, oh, they don't seem to be happy with this.
It's funny because a lot of it comes out around the teaching of mathematics, which is teaching kind of more of a conceptual understanding before just teaching the methods, which is very much not, I'm in no way a math specialist, but is very much in line with the way that we teach here, kind of that foundational understanding. And it was mostly a real big uproar with the parents, because the parents were saying, well, I wasn't taught this way. And then there were a lot of classes and learning that was needed by parents to be able to support their children effectively, not really understanding the homework and what was happening. I don't know if that's died down. I don't have any kind of gauge, not living in that that situation, but But hey, you know, if you move over there, you might get a bit less rain. That might.
Yes, you know, it could be sunshine all year round.
It could be, depending on where you live.
Yeah. Okay, so how did so obviously you did the GTP here, which is kind of on the job anyway, isn't it? But how did the training compare, or we kind of just left to it?
The GTP part. So with the GTP, I basically had the teacher standards that I had to meet by keeping a portfolio of evidence. So it's just a range of evidence, as you would do really similarly on a teacher training program.
Yeah.
And then I had an assessor come in across a day or 2 days, and the assessor watched me teach and asked me questions, talked to the head teacher, talked to the children. So from signing up to the program to completion, it only took me about 6 months. But
right, okay.
Probably could have gone a bit quicker, but that was kind of the minimum amount of time that they gave you to collect all of your evidence.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I suppose you came at it from a very different point of view of a lot of people. I know a lot of people who do GTP have done being a teaching assistant, but that's very different from having 6 years teaching experience before you even arrive.
Yeah, it was a bit easier in that sense because you understood kind of core pedagogical principles, you understood how classrooms worked and how to guide pupils and how to address their needs. What I didn't know was the curriculum content. So a lot of my time was focused getting to grips with understanding what the curriculum should be providing.
Yeah, I'm aware now that this episode's not going to be called vocabulary. It's going to be the differences between teaching in America and teaching in the UK. I was just like, I best cut out just a few more questions about what is it like in America. So
a lot of people ask me about the American side. It's absolutely fine. Yeah,
honestly, it's so interesting to everyone. So I do actually put out to the guys, you know, I'm interviewing Kelly, you know, what would you like to ask her? She knows all about vocabulary. So Hannah, who works with us, she says, do you have any top tips for improving the vocabulary of reluctant readers?
Yeah, I think first of all, with reluctant readers, it's finding a way in to help to encourage them to develop a love of reading. So one of the ways you can do that is you can spot what their interests are. So I'll give you an example of my youngest child. He absolutely adores cricket and football.
Oh, wow.
So one of the things that we started doing with him was getting him magazines like Match Attack, and he absolutely loved looking through Match Attack, talking about the text, and then we would share lots of stories together. So sharing stories to try and heighten that interest. I think the more that you can do to help children to connect what they're reading to their personal interests and their personal understanding, it is all about that motivation and engagement. So my first question would be is what reading materials are they having access to? Secondly, it would be about giving them a choice. So if you're lucky enough to have a library nearby, which unfortunately we're seeing, you know, fewer and fewer libraries active. We're lucky where I live, there's a small library in the town, and the boys and I, we go every few weeks and let them, you know, make their own selections. Obviously we'll have a talk about, what might you be interested in and what did you read last time? If you've read this book, this might be a book that you're interested in. So giving them the choice. But then moving on, it also as an adult means that you need to have a good knowledge and a good understanding of what's out there. So who are the new authors? Who are the authors that have been out there? Who writes in it? I really like this rhyming text. I like this Julia Donaldson book. Can you think of any other books that are written in that way? Or I might like something really factual and informative. What are the different types of text? I might like something with really interesting illustrations, or I might live on a farm and I might want to read something about living on a farm. So it's having good knowledge either yourself as the adult or access to our brilliant librarians, or even having a local independent bookshop somewhere nearby that has many knowledgeable people where you can go and have that open conversation.
And ask, which are good. And we were saying just before we started the official interview that can be difficult because before I had children I used to tutor and used to pick up really cheap books from like Home Bargains or something, and boy am I regretting that now, because mummy, can we read this book? Oh, they're so boring. And at 3, she might not realise, but we definitely had a cull before Christmas, and I bought better books. And I think now as a parent, I'm looking for the more interesting books. And if you don't know, you don't know. It's really difficult. You kind of have to keep that conversation and dialogue open with other teachers, don't you, really, to find out which are the good books.
I think it's really difficult because, as you say, you go into any of the major retailers and you look at the books that are up front and centre. Those are often the books that the children, if they've bought a present for birthday or Christmas, they'll get those books. Sometimes those books are of high quality and sometimes they aren't. So I think it's about going and exploring, perhaps finding an author. If you read a book and you really, really enjoy that author, read a couple of more books by that same author and help the child to see the connections that we can make. So one of the books, so back to my youngest who's mad about cricket, mad about football, one of the books that he absolutely...
How old is he?
He's 6. So when he was about 4, this was, we were starting to get these Match Attack magazines, etc. But I managed to introduce him to Dinosaur Dig by Penny Dale, who's brilliant. She's really active on Twitter, so do say hello to her. And she writes this brilliant combination of books that have these dinosaur characters along with something technical. So Dinosaur Dig.
I'm gonna write this down, but go on.
So Penny Dale. So Dinosaur Dig is written about these dinosaurs who are building something, and you don't know until the very end of the story what it is that they're building.
Don't tell me.
And I won't tell you. But it's written in a very patterned sequence. So it's one dinosaur digging a hole, a very big hole, dig, dig, dig. 2 dinosaurs shoveling gravel and earth. Can you tell I've read it about 500 times?
Yes, I'm just like, wow, this is like, I could do this with a Gruffalo.
Absolutely. But he was absolutely hooked on that. So we read the story, we reread it. He even got into the intricacies of the different characters. So for instance, he had decided that the iguanodon in the story, because he knows all the names of the specific dinosaurs. So the iguanodon was quite lazy. So he tracked the iguanodon through, and then we went back and reread, but looked at each of the different dinosaurs to see how much they had contributed to this thing that I won't spoil the ending for you.
Okay, all right.
But she's also written things like Dinosaur Zoom, Dinosaur Rescue, Dinosaur Farm, Dinosaur Rocket, Dinosaur
She loves
Pirates,
dinosaurs.
but they're all the same characters.
Yeah.
So it's something like that. If you hook onto an author or a style that the child's really into, it's really exploiting that and thinking, right, is there something that we can do here to engage the talk, to engage the love of language, to get them to explore that technical vocabulary like dinosaur names, or I think in Dinosaur Dig, one of the vehicles is called a telehandler. So, and Penny Dale talks about what that is in the back of the book with some really useful illustrations. But that will just open up their interest even more, because it is about finding books that match their interest, but also finding books that broaden their interest as well.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Kath says, have you got any tips for closing the word gap for those children who are not exposed to a wealth of language before the age of 3?
Talk. That's really, it is about how much we talk and interact with those young children. So I think if you're thinking about children coming into your setting at the age of 3, what are the likely opportunities that they've had to hear really high quality language? Have they heard stories being read aloud? Do they know, 5 little speckled frogs sat on a speckled log? Do they know Humpty Dumpty? What are the rhymes? What's the knowledge? What's the word knowledge? What's the kind of text knowledge that they have already? From the research, we know that there is quite a significant gap in children at the age of 3. So there was quite a well-known study by Hart and Risley that was conducted in the mid to late 90s in New York, and they actually worked with 40 families from a cross-section of society. So some families who were from very disadvantaged backgrounds, at the time classified as being on welfare, and some children from non-disadvantaged backgrounds. And it was a longitudinal study, so a study over a long period of time. From those children in those 40 families, from the age of 6 months to the age of 3 years, they actually went and sat in their houses for an hour every week.
Wow.
And just listened to the number of words that child was being exposed to. So I'm not sure if you've heard of the kind of statistic about this 30 million word gap.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from. It comes from the Hart and Risley study. And what they found was, at the time, was that children from disadvantaged backgrounds were hearing 30 million fewer words just in that time, from 6 months to 3 years, than the children from non-disadvantaged backgrounds. So number one is just the amount of talk that we use. The second thing to think about, which Hart and Risley also looked at in their study, was how we extend the talk. So we would call that how we make the talk dialogic. So dialogic as in dialogue, talking. So if I was to say to you, what did you have for breakfast today? And then you would say,
I had strawberries, blueberries, yogurt and cashew nuts.
Oh, that's very healthy. So in a non-dialogic conversation,
every day starts off well.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to have goals. Yeah. I'm very impressed. But if our conversation was to end there, that's just what we call a single exchange conversation. So it isn't a dialogue.
Ball dropping.
So I've just asked you a question and you've responded. If we wanted to make that dialogic, you might say, oh, blueberries, I really like blueberries. What's your favourite part of your breakfast meal? So we might ask a follow-up question, or we might ask them to clarify, or we might link them into a personal experience. And it's that dialogic back and forth conversation that really will help children to find themselves within language, but also to better articulate themselves. And it's not about getting children to so we would say recasting. So if they said, what did you have for breakfast? Cereal. Say, oh, you had cereal for breakfast. Not saying, and then usually they will say that automatically, won't they? So repeating that word in a sentence is called recasting, helping them to get the structure of the language. Or you might ask them a question. What kind of cereal did you have? What did it taste like? Was it crunchy? Was it crispy? Was it soggy? Was there too much milk? Did you have too many blueberries? Did you have enough blueberry in each spoonful? So giving them that additional information is helping them to build what's called a schema. So in our long-term memory, we have schemas of information. So I have a bunch of information in my head right now about cereal. And I think about, okay, I've got Crunchy Nut cornflakes and I've got Weetabix, but I've also got in my schema things like Kix, which was a cereal that I had when I was younger, or Lucky Charms. And you might think about the different toppings. So you know the Weetabix commercial where they challenge you every day to eat it differently. You might have that in your schema. So by talking to children and getting that dialogic nature going, what we're doing is we're getting them to broaden and expand their schema, and that's going to boost their language and vocabulary. So back to what I said, just talk as much as you can.
I find it interesting because obviously the things you're saying, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I do that with my 3-year-old, and I suppose sometimes it comes naturally, doesn't it? And I guess it's how you translate that, because it's easy to do it with one child, and my 1-year-old, I imagine that when she comes round to talking more clearly, she will have an even better vocabulary than my eldest, because she hears so much more talking, because she hears the 3-year-old and us talking more as well. But it's like, how do you translate that to the classroom when you're talking to 30 children?
I think it's, at the end of the day, as teachers, we need to find ways to uncover what the children are thinking. So we would model that by articulating, so thinking aloud, or if we're modeling writing or we're modeling reading, we might stop and say, that word's a bit peculiar, or in my case, I'm not quite sure how to spell that word. Because it has a U in it, I think, somewhere. But we would...
I am perplexed by this.
I am perplexed by the how we spell this word. So we stop, and we often do this quite naturally as teachers. You stop and you articulate, even if you feel a bit silly doing it at the time. What you're doing for the children is you're helping them to have a window into your mind. You're having a window into how you're thinking, how you're processing that schema, basically. So in the classroom, we need to not only do that modelling, but provide opportunities to make that explicitly clear that that's what we're doing for children. So when I'm talking to you as a writer, and you're getting an inside look of what I think about as a writer as I'm writing, or as a reader when I'm reading. Now it's over to you. So it's thinking about, how do we provide opportunities for children to talk and articulate their thinking? I mean, one of the big things with especially vocabulary development is it's not about teaching children new words and children memorizing new words because it was the teacher's definition. It's getting them to construct an understanding, linking it to something that's already in their mind. But in order to do that, we need to help them to unlock what's already in there by articulating. So lots of talk, lots of, talking to partners, working groups, collaborative discussion, but guided and supported by the teacher in an effective way.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I've got another question here. I think these are all from Kath, to be honest. She was on it. Kath's still teaching in school, so she's probably like, I want to know all the answers. Okay, so what age do you think the correct vocabulary should be used? And so the example she's given here is the word vertices. So she's heard vertices be referred to as points or corners in reception in year 1, but then vertices in year 2. Do you think we should use it from the beginning, or?
Well, first of all, in thinking about the language that we want to use with children, we need to think about how we would classify that language. So we have a really useful classification system that's been devised by Isabel Beck and her team. She might have heard of the book Bringing Words to Life, which is on its, I believe it's 2nd edition now. It was a text I used when I was at university to learn about vocabulary development in the first instance. They call it their robust vocabulary instruction. So it's a culmination of their research on how to make the teaching of vocabulary really robust. And Beck and her team have created this really useful tiered framework to classify words. So basically, at the bottom of the tier, sorry, I'm just gesticulating here because I have to use my hands
on the podcast, but you can always watch a YouTube video.
So at tier one is at the bottom of this model, and tier 1 are the words like your little girl, words that she uses back to the breakfast scenario, things like milk, bowl, spoon, cereal, cornflakes. These are words that children learn through spoken interaction, and they are at the bottom of this pyramid model because they form the foundation of everything else that we learn about. So we need those kind of basic conversational words, but we get to a point when actually we need to learn more sophisticated ways of saying things. So instead of, I walked down the street, I might meander, I might roam, I might gallop, I might saunter, I might move in any myriad of ways. So that's what we call a tier 2 word. So all of those more descriptive ways, usually that are linked to something in tier 1. So we can think of tier 2 is like the Rolls-Royce model of describing something quite simple, but in a more specific and detailed way. Tier 3 is what you're talking about with the word like vertex or vertices. And tier 3 words are words that we use in a specific domain or a specific context. So back to Penny Dale's book, it would be a word like telehandler or a word like iguanodon. Those words are specific to those domains of learning, and vertex or vertices would be something specific to the teaching of mathematics. So in a long-winded way, I think the first step is for the teacher to understand, where does the word fit in terms of that tier of language, those tiers of language, and how would I be expecting that child to use that word? So if something like a vertex or vertices is going to be something that really interests, because often at that age, those really big words, those technical words, that's where children learn iguanodon, ankylosaurus, all these dinosaur names. I've yet to meet a 3-year-old who can't name me 2 or 3 dinosaurs. But they do like these technical words. But sometimes as adults, we get a little bit concerned that, that might be a bit too difficult. It might be a bit too challenging. So I think if we want them to know the word vertex or vertices, is there an opportunity beyond learning that word where they can use that in their play. So if we're talking about a reception classroom, is there some opportunity where they're playing and they could drop that word into conversation? So I call that recharging. So we want to charge up the word by teaching them a new word in a variety of ways, but also it's the importance of recharging that word, not just teaching them loads and loads of words, giving them something to do with that word later on. So I think that's a really important consideration. In my personal opinion, I think limiting vocabulary in any way is never really a good idea.
Yeah.
I think if you can challenge children, if you can give them the vocabulary, expose them to that rich language at tier 2 and tier 3, you're not going to do them any harm.
Yeah, because I think, do you know what? They don't know any different. If I think about my 3-year-old now, if I taught her the word vertices and said, you know, this is a vertex, she'd be like, okay. She'd use it. You know, she's not bothered. She doesn't know that it's more difficult.
No, and for some children, that word will come in what we call our word hoard. So the amount of words that we hold in our minds, that word will come in, it might stick to something that's already there. So they might know some other mathematical words that are similar, and I think, oh, that's one of those special mathematics words, and they put that in their word hoard into that category. Now, whether or not they then retrieve that word and use that later on is up to whether or not they've recharged it sufficiently over time. So it might just be, right, vertex, that's quite interesting. That means a point on a triangle.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily going to use that later on. So we need to think about what the usability is of that word.
Trying to make sure they use it again.
If that's what we want them to do.
Because I think we kind of touched on this before, because my daughter, she automatically tries to use them again. I haven't sort of taught her anything. She just, I don't know, I suppose maybe it's how interested she is in the words. She does, I noticed that she does use those again herself. But then she could have found opportunities to play with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the thing is that so I'm pointing to the back of my head now, because the back of our head, that's what we call the visual cortex part of the brain. I'm in no way a neuroscientist, but I do know a little bit, about these things. So the back of our brain's the visual cortex. So you imagine in the back of the brain, you have this visual store of words. The front part of the brain is where all the auditory information comes in. So when we hear a word, if we hear a word like vertex, okay, so the word comes in, I hear the word and I'm processing either that word as a whole word, or I might be processing individual sounds, so the v sound, or I might be processing syllables, vertex, but in some way I'm auditorily processing that word. It then comes to the visual part of my brain, and even though we don't have the word vertex written down, you can see the word.
Yeah, I can see the word.
You can see the word, and that's your visual cortex activating. And that's where all of our knowledge of spelling system and how words work.
And I guess a child won't have that.
No, exactly. So if a child hasn't unlocked the code, so that's why, early teaching of phonics, systematic phonics, if they haven't unlocked the code and they don't know that a V is represented in that word by the letter V and the X is represented by the letter X, they might just have heard the word, but they may or may not visually map that word. Right. So the visual mapping of the word helps to solidify that and make it stronger.
So can the visual mapping be not the text and be something else?
The visual mapping could be individual sounds within the words. It could be the shape of the word. It could be a word that looks like another word, or it could be the spelling of a word.
So not a picture that would associate with the word.
It could be, yeah. So for very young children,
yeah, because I just think at this age she knows some sounds, but she doesn't really know any words.
Absolutely. So visually, she might be mapping that by thinking about the triangle, and she might be thinking, right, that point on the top of the triangle, that might be how she's visually mapping. Or
maybe when she said, oh, this lasagna is delicious last night, she must have been picturing my lasagna.
Absolutely.
When she was thinking of the word delicious.
She was thinking of Mummy with the bright sun shining round your face.
Of course, that. She did actually say the other day, which was hilarious. We were having fish and chips, by the way. Edward will hate me for telling you this on the podcast, but I even videoed it. So she said, I said, oh, what's Mummy the best at? She says, Mummy's the best at cooking. I said, oh, and what's Daddy the best at? putting food on the plate. Because he just does fish and chips. I was like, yes.
Not putting the dishes in the dishwasher then, no.
Oh, no, he's not the best at that. Just putting the food on the plate. He can cook really well, but just doesn't.
But back to those memory stores and those visual stores. So just taking that a bit further. So we've mapped it. It's come in the auditory, it's come in the front, it's in the visual. But actually getting that word out again causes another challenge. So we have two different types of language stores. We have a receptive store. So think of something receptive, something that you receive. So when we receive language, we receive it by reading and we receive it by listening to people talk. We also have an expressive vocabulary store, so how we express our ideas, our information through writing, through speaking. So when that word comes in, we are more likely, if we've visually mapped it quite sufficiently, when we come across the word vertex in a text, I might, if I've mapped the word, if I see that word, I'm automatically triggering that in my visual cortex, in my word hoard, and saying, right, vertex. I might remember something about the word. I might just remember that the V has a point at the bottom, and that might be my mental hook to remember what that word means. But I'm not as likely to be able to remember the word, to remember how to say the word, vertex, so to form those words in my mouth, and then to be able to express it in a spoken way. And I'm even less likely to be able to remember it and be able to write it and spell it correctly. That's because our receptive bank, so for reading and listening, the words that we have there is a lot greater number of words than words that we have for expressive. So back to that classroom situation, that goes back to the recharging. So if you're wanting the child to learn the word vertex and use the word vertex when they're playing, when they're talking, or perhaps for older children at some point when they're writing, or even for younger children if it's appropriate at that time, it's how much exposure we have to give them to that word. And research says it's up to 24 exposures for that word.
That's really interesting because I kind of think, I've seen classrooms where they've got like a word of the day or something. But is word of the day enough? It's actually, we kind of forget and we think, word of the day, right, guys? This is the word for today. But we forget that they need that exposure over time. It's like we need a plan for that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are a lot of really, really good vocabulary resources that are available that teachers can go to at the minute from a range of sources. Something like word of the day can be positive because what it shows me is that we are having a focus on vocabulary instruction. However, word of the day could be made even more effective. So let's think about word of the day. I'm going to give you some numbers now. So what research tells us is that to be a fully functioning adult, we need to have a vocabulary store of about 50,000 words, 50,000 to 60,000. So the age of 16, that's to kind of be fully functioning, literate adult within society. If we peel that back, so back to Isabel Beck's research, Bringing Words to Life, what her and her team found is that to achieve that number, children need to be having between 2,000 to 3,000 words entering this visual word hoard every year up to that age to achieve that.
Extra words.
So 2,000 to 3,000 words a year is what they need to be exposed to. So back to your earlier question, if a child comes in age of 3 and there is a significant word gap, so they haven't heard a lot of language.
They have to
we have even more.
Words.
Yeah, and we call that the Matthew effect. So the Bible verse Matthew, the rich get richer, the poor get poor.
Right,
So it's about that word gap getting wider and wider.
Yeah.
So I think it's thinking about those numbers. So 50,000 words, 2,000 to 3,000 a year. But without panicking teachers, that doesn't mean that we
parents,
that doesn't mean that we need to teach them 2,000 to 3,000 words a year, but what it does mean is we need to have a language-rich environment. So we need to be
because
talking,
they need to be picking up those extra 2,000.
Modelling, interacting, high-quality text. So bringing that down even further, Isabel Beck suggests that we should directly instruct. So let's say you had chosen a word like meander, okay, for another word for walk. So tier 2 word meander, linking to tier 1, a word they already know, then we need to teach 400 of those is what Beck suggests in order for children 400 of the 2,000 to 3,000 need to be
Each
directly
year.
instructed by the teacher in the classroom.
Right.
And if you break that down, that's about 10 per week.
Right.
Now, I wouldn't go about that personally as a word of the day approach. My approach is more of a contextual approach to instruction. So I'll give you an example. What does that mean, contextual? I'm working with a group of teachers at the minute in Boston. So there's a reading project that's happening in the early years currently. And we were having a conversation the other week about children on the playground not being able to communicate effectively with each other. So it might be that English isn't their first language, and it might not be the case, but they just weren't communicating effectively. So we talked on the project about how you could teach them words in context that they could use to make their play more engaging, more interesting. So we talked, that was the context there. So the context is, what is it that we're going to be doing after we've taught this word where they can recharge this word after? So it might be, the context is we're reading a really great book and I'm selecting a couple of words from this chapter. Or it might be we're going on a trip and I'm going to give them some words that they can use to talk about and describe the experience. Or it might be linked to something on the playground or a visitor coming in. So the context part needs to be really, really strong because that links to the recharging. Now, you can make a word of the day context specific, but it needs to be, at the end of the day, that's the big thing. If they're not going to use it, then are we getting the best
you need to plan in the recharging. I guess it's like learning to drive, isn't it, really? You learn to drive and you've always got your instructor there, but they say you really learn to drive after that point by the practice and by having to actually do it. So I guess it's the same thing, once you've learned it, unless you're going to use it, then you're going to forget it,
That's right. We won't talk about learning to drive because I had to relearn to drive when I moved here.
Oh, not another thing.
So I had to learn how to, change gears. All my cars were always automatic. On the other side,
now and I love it.
Different signs. Long story short, I failed the test about 3 times before I eventually passed it. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah, but at least you don't have to renew it.
That's true.
Yeah. But they might bring that in, you never know. Okay, thank you, because I'm learning so much, and I love the podcast episodes when I learn lots. Okay, so we've got more questions here. So, in fact, you've already answered this. How do you encourage learners to remember and use the vocabulary? You get them to play.
Yeah, I think it's about the recharging, but it is also about how we charge up that word. So the particular phrase that I use, I call it power up. So my approach is word power, and the phrase I use is we want to power up this word. So we think about, if I'm introducing a new word. So let's look, I brought a couple of books here today. One of another favourite in our house, Tyrannosaurus Drip by Julia Donaldson. So in the beginning of the text, it says, in a swamp beside a river where the land was thick with veg. So if I say that first part, in a swamp, what are you picturing in your mind? If I didn't show you the picture in the book, obviously the picture gives us...
Probably not dinosaurs, but a swamp.
So what it might be, wet, boggy, marshy...
Brown.
Yeah, so you're starting to build. So that's back to the schema that we were talking about. You're building your schema and your knowledge. Now, again, I grew up in Florida, not far from the Everglades, so I have a lot of schema with regard to swamps and don't go near the water's edge because the alligators like to sun themselves.
Wow.
And you had to be careful of water moccasins if you went swimming in your friend's
that's
pools.
interesting because you're actually thinking so. When you're thinking of a swamp, you're thinking of an actual swamp. But all my kind of thoughts about swamps are like probably on TV or as part of maybe like, I think the one I'm thinking of is animated. So it must be from an animated film or something.
Okay.
Because...
Oh, Shrek. Is it Shrek? Because he lives in a swamp.
Yeah, he does actually. No, I think it's... there's one about a princess. Some swan princess. There's a swamp in that.
Okay, the frog.
No, it's not a Disney one.
Oh, okay. I think I've seen them all. We're very much into the Disney films in our house. Saturday afternoon movie time.
Yeah. Especially Toy Story. But I think that's really interesting because I would say here there's not a lot of swamps that we would visit.
No, and that is so important. Another key piece of research that I always talk about is Wayne Tennant, and he writes a lot about reading comprehension, understanding reading comprehension. Him and others such as Nikki Gamble from Just Imagine, they wrote the Guiding Readers book, which is another really interesting one, and they talk a lot about what a reader brings to the text. So it's about, for me, when I say in a swamp beside a river, I'm bringing my personal experience of swamp, and it's quite a rich experience because I've been there, I've walked through it, I've heard the squelch, 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 I've smelled what it smells like, I've heard the kind of the crickets and the katydids, I've heard the noise that you hear when it's quite a wet, boggy area, whereas you will have an understanding through what you've read, through what you've seen, but perhaps not as much of a richness of experience. Yeah. And that's one of the first principles that I talk about, is kind of unlocking what's already there for children.
Yeah.
So I say we want to unlock their word and world knowledge. So if I was to say, what we did there is we were unlocking world knowledge, what were your personal associations, but we also did a little bit of unlocking word knowledge, so making connections and associations with the word marsh, bog, quagmire, muddy, wet, sloppy, stinky. We might come up with many associated words in our schema of a swamp. So that's the first step. The next thing we would want to do...
So what would you do then? Would you start reading this book and then stop it there and say, right, swamp?
It depends on how you did it. Now, the word swamp is what I would call an anchor word in the text. So a swamp is where they live. It's something that the children really need to know a lot about. So I might talk to them about a swamp beforehand.
Right.
So in a classroom situation, I would perhaps do a little bit of pre-teaching. I might tell them a story about being in a swamp or walking through the swamp and what I heard, what I saw, what I felt. I might have a really high quality image of a swamp. I might have some kind of audio of what the crickets and the katydids sound like in the kind of the chirping, the sound that you hear in a swamp. I might collect some words, give them a bit of an association as an initial to get them into the text. So you could pre-teach some of the words. I wouldn't pre-teach all of the words, but I might choose something like swamp is quite a significant word that they need to know. Another strategy that you could do is if you come across a word, swamp, so in a swamp, I might hold the book up and then I might point to the children and say, all right, well, we know it's a swamp. You see how the little feet are in the water. It's very wet. There's some greenery around. There's some reeds. There's some ferns. So I might bring them into the image, or I might stop at that point, bring myself out of the text as a teacher and do a simple think aloud. So in a swamp, you can do this by... When I was in the classroom, I would kind of have a scarf that I wore when I was reading as a reader, and then I took the scarf off when I was talking to them as a teacher.
Right, okay.
So I'd say, in a swamp, scarf on, take the scarf off. Swamp, that's a bit of a tricky word. So swamp is a really wet, muddy place, lots of water, and that's what this story is going to be about. Just as quick as that, and then carry on reading.
Yeah, and that's something that we all naturally do as teachers. I do that now as a parent. Sometimes when you think, I need to explain this word, or sometimes just act like a thesaurus and say lots of other words on that word. I think that is quite a natural thing that we do, isn't it, really?
And back to what we were talking about earlier about kind of targeting, I call it the weekly top 10, but targeting roughly 10 words per week. You might target 10 words from Tyrannosaurus drip. You might pick 10 words from this text. You might pick 5 words here and 5 words there. But as a teacher, I probably would have twigged already that that's a word that I'm going to want to introduce. So we've thought about what associations they've made, what word connections, and then we would want to power up that word in some ways. So with the word swamp, if I'm looking at that, I might look at that word visually. Okay, so I call this this strategy orthography, which sounds like a really complicated word, but if you break it down, ortho means correct, so like you go to an orthodontist to get correct teeth, don't you?
Yeah.
And graph is writing, so orthography is just visual or spelling. So one of the strategies, you might look at the word swamp, and you might get the child to write the word swamp and then say, right, can you think of any other words that start with that letter string SW? So swamp, swing, sweat, sweater. And again, remember the visual part of the brain. I might, as a learner, make a quick visual connection, of an orthographic connection, a spelling connection with that word. Or you might look at the end two words, the MP. Okay, so that's another visual. I might think of words like bump or shrimp, or any words that end lamp.
I was like, oh, I've got one.
Absolutely, yes, you've got one. So that's one strategy. Another strategy is what we call phonology. So do you hear the phone bit? The phonology is the sounds, the sounds of the words or the sounds in our language. So I might get them to just simply repeat the word. I might repeat after me. So just join in with me if you will. So I might say swamp,
Swamp.
swamp,
Swamp.
swamp,
Swamp.
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 Okay, and I might even
That's fun.
yeah, I might even segment, and I might say swamp. And your turn.
Swamp.
Okay, so that would be segmenting. If it was a bigger, if it was a longer word, you could segment the syllables.
Yeah.
So I might think of that. We've already made some personal connections, so we might get them to activate, what kind of animals would you find in a swamp? So we might say alligators or snakes or whatever. What would you see if you were in a swamp? What wouldn't you see if you were in a swamp? So it's trying to activate that. So that's another one, personal links. We could get them to make, we've done connections already, which is perhaps synonyms, bog, quagmire. But we might also think of, if it wasn't a swamp, what's the opposite of a swamp? If I was somewhere, I'm in a swamp and someone else is somewhere completely opposite, what does their place look like? Is it really dry and really clean and pristine?
Sounds like the one I'd want to be in.
That one, yes, absolutely. I could also think of another big word coming up. So we've had orthography, which was the spelling. We've had phonology, which is the sounds. We could also look at what's called the morphology. So again, it's not like I'm thinking of the Power Rangers here, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. My kids are well into that at the minute. But morph is where we can change something. So, but a morpheme is a smallest unit of meaning in a word. So in the word swamp, that word holds meaning. But what if I said to you, do you know what? I'm so busy this week. I'm absolutely swamped.
Yeah.
In that word, swamped, first of all, it has a different meaning than it does in this context, but we have two morphemes in that word. So you have swamp, which in that case acts as a verb, and then you have the suffix ed, which funnily enough, if we only used our ear, it sounds like a t, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Swamped.
Yeah.
But if I understand, I was swamped at work, it's something that happened in the past.
Yeah.
So I'm tuning in all of those different strategies. So that word actually has two morphemes.
Yeah.
In the curriculum, we talk a lot about word families. So words words that share the same root. So if you think of the word scribe or script, which are basically the same, you can have a scribe, so one who writes. You can have a subscription, an inscription, a subscription. So can you see if we know the root meaning of those words, as a learning new words, boosting our vocabulary, if we can get an understanding of the root, then we can develop that even further. And actually we don't...
Lots of words together.
Yeah, I don't necessarily need to know the specific meaning of subscription, inscription, description. That's why we have all this focus on teaching prefixes and suffixes in the curriculum. So we've had spelling, sound, personal connection, synonyms, antonyms. We've had morphology. You could also do something around word class. So in a swamp is functioning as a noun. So this is a noun in this sentence. So we could think about other contexts where we could use swamp as a noun, not just in this story, but beyond that. And then the final one is another really big word, etymology. So that's the history of the words in our language. And this is a great strategy, especially into Key Stage 2, getting children to investigate how words have arrived in our language and how they've changed over time. So the word swamp, I believe it comes from Middle English, and it means something similar like mossy, or something not exactly as the swamp there, but it was a word that we've retained from a previous version of English, from Middle English. So it's really interesting, all of those strategies. Can you see how we've looked at that word in depth?
Yeah.
Now I wouldn't be doing that now as I'm reading the story.
Yeah.
I would be giving them just a quick introduction, help them to find the word in the text to clarify its meaning. But all of that other additional discussion, that powering up, would happen after we've read. And that's back to, if you imagine in your word hoard, can the word get deeper and deeper and deeper into your word hoard? Because the more it's there, the more connections it has, the more likely I'm going to use it when I'm reading, when I'm writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just got a couple of questions on that because it's so interesting. So obviously you've given a lot of strategies there, so thank you so much. Do they all count toward your 24 times?
Yeah, any of those, if you get them to kind of articulate the word in different ways or segment. Now get back to that 24 exposures, that's kind of the Rolls-Royce model, top of the scale. For some words, if a child already has a really strong association and connection, we might only need a few exposures.
Some children might not need that amount of times, because I was thinking, 24 times is a lot of times. But then actually, you've given a lot of strategies, and so it's kind of easy.
That was probably 24 in what we just talked
absolutely.
about. And I think it's thinking about what we have a close connection to. So if you were to take the word handkerchief, that might not be a word that a child's very familiar with. My youngest, he's always pinching Grandad's handkerchiefs when he goes to his house, because he has a little bit of an obsession. I find them like squirreled away in his room. But he knows that word because Grandad uses that word a lot, and he actually uses the word handkerchief. But it's not a word that we use quite regularly. It's something very specific to a specific item. So for that word to come in, again, I might recognize it if that word popped up in a story, if I've had that exposure. But me remembering how to articulate, how to say the word, which is why the speaking and the repetition.
Especially when you're not at a stage where you can spell it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the speaking and the repetition is really key, getting them to come up with that word.
So just going back to this whole talk about the word swamp, you said like you would look through this book and this is one idea to find words. Does that mean, and you want it to be in context, so you wouldn't plan out, because I feel like a lot of teachers would think, right, okay, I want to plan out my 10 words a week for the entire year. Would you kind of avoid doing that and do what is, and just trust that if we're all doing this, then we're going to have a better effect?
Yeah, I mean, there are some programs, some really highly effective programs that map words out for you, and they say, these are kind of good words to teach for certain ages. But as I say, with this program, it's more week to week. What are we doing? What the key question for teachers is which words do I really want to focus on explicitly? So we would call this the explicit vocabulary instruction. Which words do I want to focus on explicitly because I know they're going to be doing something, they're going to be recharging these words in some way. And it's really hard to do that, to map those words out across a year. So it would be thinking, this week, actually my weekly top 10, it wasn't quite right. They were too hard, or they were too easy, or so it helps you to adjust.
They were unrelated as well.
Yeah.
I guess really this is making it fit our curriculum at the moment, because it really is helping you to deepen those, whereas it'd be a lot harder if it wasn't in context to deepen them properly, wouldn't it?
That's right. And it might be that some weeks you have a few tier 3 words in there. So we know sometimes you might select some specific tier 3 words if you're teaching something in geography or history or science. And you might pick a few tier 3 words, so specific words like, I don't know, something like evaporation. But what you might do is you might then pick a few tier 2 words that can help them to describe that process of evaporation. They aren't subject specific words, so we might pick some specific tier 2 words to help them to describe that more complex tier 3 concept. So in context, it can be a range of context. It can be in context in a literacy lesson. It can be in context for a trip, a visit, something that you're having difficulty with in terms of children communicating at school, or across the curriculum. So it's a real versatile approach, but the key is that the teacher is actively thinking that week, what are the words that I'm really focusing on, and how are we going to charge them up, and how are we going to recharge them.
I feel like I need to listen to this podcast again when it goes live so I can do all homeworks and write children at home.
I need to test you on all those ologies now. Phonology, etymology, those are a bit hard to get your head around.
Yeah, I'll need to listen to that one. It'll be in the show notes, I'll read it. Okay, so tell me about your book then.
Okay, so really excited. I've always wanted to write a book ever since I was little. I had this idea that I wanted to write a book. I don't know what I wanted to write it about. I think at some point I wanted to write a poetry book, and some point I wanted to write some kind of mystery. And I've landed on a text for teachers about how to teach vocabulary. So this book is it's called Word Power: Amplifying Vocabulary Instruction. Yeah.
If you're on YouTube, you can see it now.
Yeah. So it's just come out September 2019. And it's all about how, as teachers, we could use this as a professional development tool in schools to open up conversations with teachers about how we deepen children's knowledge of words. So, for example, in the book, each of those strategies that I talked you through with SWAMP, there's a chapter in here about each of those. So it talks through...
so it's in a lot more detail as well.
Yes, it talks through. And as well, which makes it a little bit more fun and jazzy, each of the strategies have come up with a superhero character.
Okay, yeah.
So, for example, when we were talking about the phonology, the swamp, that would be the phoneme phantom. And each of the superheroes has specific features in how they've been created to remind children of the different things they can do within that strategy to help them to power up words. And really, that's the crux of the text. Each chapter, I've tried to think really influenced by, I love his name, Oliver Caviglioli, dual coding, Ollie Cav. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No, but I just definitely don't want to learn his name.
Oliver Caviglioli.
He just rolled off your tongue. I was like, what now?
But he on Twitter, he's Ollie Cav, and he talks a lot about when you read a book, you often, if it's a technical text or a professional text, you'll read a chapter and then at the end there's kind of these reflection questions. But going on Ollie Cav's approach, what I've done is in each chapter I've set out kind of a summary at the start of that chapter. So even busy teachers, even if you can't go into detail, I'm going to read all this information about this strategy, you can look through kind of the basic information at the front and say, oh, is this something that I want to learn a bit more about? So it helps you to navigate the text.
Especially as a book where, I mean, you get books, don't you, like a novel where you've got to read it from beginning to end. But this is more like a reference book, isn't it? Where you keep it, you don't take it to the charity shop afterwards, you keep it because you need it again, and so that's helpful. Like, was it in this chapter? Oh yes, it is.
Absolutely. And I'm mad about books. So throughout the text it talks, as I say, it's a contextual approach to instruction. So I reference lots of different texts that teachers will find familiar and how we would power up using that particular text. It doesn't give lists of words and it doesn't tell you the words to teach. It's a strategy for teachers to reflect on their own practice, and hopefully I hope it'll help people to open up conversations about what they think about the teaching of vocabulary. And do we really teach words in depth? Do we really pick those words that we want to teach? And do we have a good range of strategies? Because there are a lot of strategies in here that teachers will say, oh yeah, I do that, but it's how they're connected and how they're building up within words to help them to recharge those words for a purpose in reading or in writing.
And also, even then when you're saying, teachers will say, oh, I do that. Well, I said that as well, but obviously not the range. And I think, the conversation could probably go, how do I even start teaching vocabulary? So yes, when you're saying those things, they might recognise some of the things that they're doing. But really, as teachers, are we a bit scared by that? How do I even teach vocabulary? And think that there must be some mysterious kind of way.
Yeah.
And you've kind of packaged it all up nicely.
Yeah, I hope teachers will come to this and it'll make them feel more confident about what they are doing, but it also might challenge them a bit to think about why they're doing what they're doing and how they can amplify, that's kind of in the title, how they can amplify that instruction even more.
How they can power it all up.
Yeah, absolute power up. Yeah, get you to use the lingo. Yeah. So it's not... you can get it on my website, is where you can order them at the minute. So there's a facility to order.
We'll put a link for that in the show notes.
Yeah. And I'm really excited. I'm going to do a giveaway for your podcast. So
nice.
I'm giving a copy to the podcast. So I'm sure you can find out ways to enter into the giveaway.
Yeah, so we'll run a giveaway on the Facebook page and details to follow. It'll probably be something like a week or something from release date.
Maybe even give them, back to the American link, as part of the giveaway, give us your favourite American, British kind of words that link. So for example,
like nappy and diaper?
Nappy and diaper, or trolley and cart, or tin and can, or anything, or your favourite Americanism. You can put an American slant on it if you want.
Yeah, but I do like that idea. The words that are different, because just this morning, the children are watching Chip and Potato, and on Netflix. It's the worst show ever.
I've never seen that one.
Oh well, you're lucky. That's because your children are a bit older. But anyway, this Chip's got this new baby sister, and Hattie's watching it with such concentration. I'm thinking, this is interesting, because you're probably thinking, this is what it was like when my sister arrived. And then I heard the word diaper, and I'm thinking, I wonder if she sort of just accepted that word. It's funny how I was just thinking about this morning and knows that it means nappies because she's watching it.
Yeah, because she's had the context.
Yeah, she's never come to me and said, what's a diaper? Or we've never had the conversation. So I'll probably try and find that out when I get home. Does she know what a diaper actually is? Probably, because...
Yeah, and I think we sometimes can make assumptions on what we think they know and what they don't know. Yeah. But actually, sometimes the context of that will bring it out. I've talked a lot about my youngest and his cricket and football interest, but my eldest is absolutely obsessed, because both my children are dual citizens as I am, so both British and American, and my eldest son is really into anything that's an Americanism at the minute. So he loves, so yours will get into this later, Henry Danger and the Thundermans, which are Nickelodeon, they're superhero kind of type shows. And obviously they're American shows. And he picks it up, and his accent is brilliant. He can pass proper American accent, not like a British person, but a British person trying to sound American. But sometimes he'll come out with things like, Mum, can I have some water? It's like, even I don't say it like that, But very bizarrely, he'll then say bath. I blame Peppa Pig. Because I don't say it, and my husband doesn't say it, and his friends in North Yorkshire don't say it that way.
Somebody told me the other day that Peppa Pig's really big in America, is it?
Oh yeah, it's massive. Oh. Yeah, massive everywhere you go. So
we're really pleased that she signed up for that, because I saw the other day that she's doing a last episode, and then there's the new Peppa Pig.
Oh dear. Yeah, we moved on from that to Ben and Holly, and now we're on to superheroes.
I'm not looking forward to that one, because Peppa Pig, actually, at least there's a bit of humour in it for adults. I don't mind it.
Ben and Holly's even better. Oh no, Paw Patrol, no.
Yeah.
Not
anyway.
Yeah. Sorry, we digress.
Just advertising all these shows. Okay, so if you could wave a magic wand, how would you solve the life-work balance problem for teachers?
Yeah. I mean, I think with the life-work balance, it's really difficult. I think in particular around curriculum development at the minute. So in schools, we've had a real invigorated, look at the curriculum, especially with kind of standards and expectations of what we need. If I could wave a magic wand, I would give us more time for schools and teachers to develop a curriculum that's right for the context, that's right for the school, but not just really quickly developing that curriculum, having time to test it out, to embed it, to get ideas and information. So it's almost like there's a really good advert that I sometimes use on my training. It's an EDF Energy. I don't even know what EDF Energy is, but the advert is called Building Planes in the Sky. And it's a really great metaphor. I often feel like that. So in this advert, you have these people literally building the plane as it's flying. And I feel as teachers, a lot of times we're expected to do that. We're expected to kind of craft this amazingly wonderful and connected curriculum, but we're doing it and then we're delivering it, and then we're developing something else in the curriculum and we're delivering it. And what we know about good implementation is that you need that time to embed, that time to think things that time to align, that alignment.
Time to be in the same year group.
Absolutely.
Year after year. You're absolutely right, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast. It's just, you're expected that it's got to be, 100%, and you haven't even had time to work out if it's going to work or not. You have to test things out.
Yeah. So I would just give more time in being able to do it right, because I think it's a really exciting time to be able to craft a curriculum that's really bespoke and means a lot for your school community, for your learners, for your families, but being able to have the time to do that right.
Yeah. Okay. Where do you think education is going to go in the next 10 years?
Oh, in the next 10 years? Well, I would like to think that we'll continue to have like this real focus and drive on vocabulary. Vocabulary seems to have always been like the real poor relation in the curriculum. Back to the differences in the American and the US system, vocabulary was always really front and center, perhaps because we had people like Fountas and Pinnell who were writing these materials, and that was really central to their approach as well. But I think we're starting to understand, in order to deepen our knowledge of subjects, in order to strengthen our skills and capabilities as readers, we need to have a broad and rich vocabulary. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not just about, let's shove a whole loads of words in, because we know that they'll just as quickly fly out again. It's about building those strong connections and associations. So in the next 10 years, I hope to see that this improved focus on vocabulary, both within English itself, English as a medium for strengthening knowledge and deepening understanding in other subjects, but for teachers to really understand how words work and how they're connected, and how we can use a range of strategies to really help children to develop the word knowledge that they need to access a range of subjects.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like there are so many things like that, in technology, in vocabulary, in mathematics, and it's how we do it all and get it to a good point.
But also, being as active members of our society, we have, I do find it fascinating. So the dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary, they do, I believe, 4 updates a year. And every year there's about 1,200 new words coming into the dictionary. Now, sometimes it might be a brand new word. We call that a neologism. So can you hear the neo in there? So that's the new part. So a new word. So a word like Googled. That was a word that never existed.
And we say that even when we use Bing.
Absolutely. So these new words, but also in one of the recent updates, the word ace was added. So we've had ace previously, as in ace in a deck of cards, or we might have even said in America to ace a test, because we had a system of A, B, C, D. But now
ace would be like, that's
ace is like, oh, that's ace, and that's the new meaning that's come into the dictionary. So it might just recently.
I used that as a kid.
Absolutely, but it's about how it travels into the dictionary. How that word makes that journey. Back to my book, book obsession. There's a great book called Frindle. And it's written by Andrew Clements, and it talks just about that. It's about a little boy who renames the pen a frindle. And it's about the journey of when he's in school, to then when he becomes an adult, and how that word grows and develops and grows in popularity, and how long it actually takes that word to get into the dictionary.
It's interesting that we're talking about this, because I'm one of those people who thinks about random things, and I think just yesterday I was thinking of things, so say if you have a saying and then you'll notice that that saying's also in America, and you think, how did it even get there? How does it travel? Because surely just one person starts that off, or is it that a few people had the same thought for that one particular saying?
Yeah.
How?
Well, what the technical term for it is something called like a semantic shift, if you want to get really technical. So semantics, you hear the man bit, that's the meaning bit of the word semantics. So a semantic shift is how words have changed in meaning over time. So if you take a word awful, okay, you might be thinking, let's go back to that bit we were talking about morphology there. We've got the word awe and we've got full. So if we used our morphology to work out the meaning of the word awful, it should mean full of awe.
Yeah.
And it did. It did. It used to mean full of awe. But over time, that word's been used. Often we have kind of concrete meanings of words that shift into more metaphorical meanings, and you can still see a connection. Sometimes linguists can talk about it in terms of like a colour palette. So if you're mixing yellow and red, sometimes it might look a bit more, lighter orange, and sometimes it might look a bit more vibrant orange. It's the same thing if you think of a shift of a word, and so a word like awful has completely shifted in its meaning.
It would have taken time and variations.
Absolutely, and it's all cultural and social influences. How words change over time, and also uses back to our world knowledge, how we would use that word in our world. So when we had people from England coming to the US back, hundreds of years ago to settle, they had to come up with new words to describe their surroundings. So there were a lot of neologisms back then, describing the different animals and the plants and so on. Those words have then become embedded. But as we've started to travel more and more around the world, we've borrowed, the English language, we're like magpies, we've borrowed words, so words like canoe, barbecue, banjo, French words like cafe and chateau. There's I think there's roughly 10,000 words in the English language that are from French because of the Norman invasion. That's all from Middle English, what we were talking about before. So language is so interesting. I never in my life, my least favourite subject, sorry history teachers, was history. I never had any history teachers that really kind of ignited that spark or interest. It's only in the last 10 years when I've been reading about the history of language that I've in a roundabout way started to learn about the history and how things work. And it is about influences over time. So etymology is absolutely fascinating. It's one of my favourite parts of language. There's a great website that you can go on, free website for Key Stage 2 teachers. If you're wanting to learn a bit more about etymology, you can get etymology dictionaries in school, but the Etymology Online Dictionary is a great resource. Just don't use it live in the classroom, because sometimes it can throw back some quite questionable results that you wouldn't want to discuss with children. So use it for your own information, but not necessarily as a live tool in the classroom. Yeah.
Thank you for that tip. Right, okay, last two questions then. Who was your favourite teacher at school and why?
Oh, do you know? It's a funny one, because I had so many teachers that I really, really liked, but none of them were from primary. Isn't that bizarre?
So I think probably one of the teachers I liked was secondary.
Yeah, and if you think about who your favourite teacher was, it was someone who showed an interest in you, someone who challenged you, someone who was funny. So like in middle school, so we called it middle school at that time, so that's kind of years, Key Stage 3, middle school. I had a science teacher called Mr. Zabel, and again, I wasn't particularly interested in science, but he was so funny. I remember he just made science so real and so interesting. In high school, I took a creative writing course, and I had a couple of English teachers, Mrs. Bamdis and Mrs. Zacher. So Miss Bamdis taught me all about, she was a bit like, kind of loose and kind of very earthy kind of person, and very kind of like flowy and very creative.
We call it hippie.
Hippie, yes, I didn't want to use that word, but yes, she was very hippified. We won't use that word. But she taught me all about poetry and creative writing and self-expression, which is great when you're 15, when you've got all sorts of stuff going on in your head. And then Mrs. Zacher was very different. She was a very different type of person, but she taught us all about words and how words work. But I would say probably if I had to pick one, since I've given you loads there, I would pick from my teacher training at UCF. So it was a lady called Terry Torbert, and I'll never forget her. She taught my module on, it was a children's literature module, and it was all about how we could develop literacy in the classroom. And she helped me to love children's literature, and it was her passion. I still remember our first day with her. She showed us this slideshow of her first grade class, and she was in tears talking about these children and how much they had come on and how much she was going to miss them. So she was only seconded for a year to the university, but I remember seeing her and thinking, do you know what, I want to be like you. I want to be that kind of teacher. And I think that's probably what sparked my interest in my specialism
in the teaching. Wow. Okay, thank you. And finally, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, what did I want? Well, but I wanted to write a book, but that's not kind of what you want to be. It was a funny one. So I started off, as I mentioned before, I was a dance teacher.
Oh, yes, so was I.
Really, really random. So I was very much into French. So I took French to quite a high level all the way through secondary school and into university as well. And I had come up with this plan when I was around about, early age of 8. I just wanted to be a dance teacher. And then as I grew, I wanted to be a dance teacher, and then I wanted to be a dance teacher in France. And then I wanted to have my own studio. But it's really funny how life comes full circle, because I came to France once in high school on like this program where you develop your language. But every year now, my husband and the boys, we go to France on holiday.
Oh, right, yeah.
And it's so funny because it makes me think like, I said I always wanted to be in France when I was older, and we've been doing that for the last 8 years.
And when you were there, that was such a sort of a long way to go, whereas now,
a couple of hours you're
just
there.
a drive.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit random, but that was probably it. Just something dancing and French.
And it
very much a Francophile.
The teaching bit happened, the France bit kind of happened.
Kind of.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. You've given me personally so much to think about. So I know it's just going to be a great episode. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.